Welcome to French Lick Resort in southwest central Indiana, in the town of French Lick, and I am located at Pluto Springs. Pluto Springs is one of the three springs that were sources of mineralized waters that form the nucleation of not just French Lick Resort, but also West Baden and the spa and mineral water industry that dates back to the middle of the 1800s in this region. Pluto Springs and the other mineral springs here are highly enriched in sulfate. Those waters are associated with rising fluids that are coming up to the surface from depth several hundred feet below us, and they're rising up to the surface through a series of fractures that connect the underlying mineral water reserve in the lower Mississippian carbonates all the way up to the surface here. These waters, as I said, are enriched in sulfate. You can tell that in a couple of ways. One is that as the water emerges to the surface, it gets reduced through that process, and you have then conversion of that sulfate to sulfide, and you can smell that sulfide as you travel down this spring run as that characteristic rotten egg smell. Another way you can sort of tell the enrichment of the sulfate is that you can see the filamentous white bacterias that are using that sulfur in the water as part of their food process. So, what is the source of the sulfate here? In many situations, you might have a petroleum reserve or basinal brines that are bringing with them sulfur. That's not the case here. This sulfur is ultimately largely sourced to the gypsum horizons in the lower St. Louis limestone. And as waters that recharge the aquifer out on the Mitchell Plateau travel down dip, they dissolve more of that gypsum, such that up on the Mitchell Plateau, none of that anhydrite or gypsum exists in any real form anymore, and where it was in the St. Louis, you have collapse and brecciation. As you travel down dip, that water becomes more mineralized. Some of that water rises back to the surface at Orangeville Rise and at Lost River Rise, which are the outlets for the Lost River Karst aquifer, but some of that continues down dip all the way down to here, where it reaches a zone that we call the gypsum front, where that water is no longer has the capacity to dissolve more gypsum, and so that gypsum from here continuing down dip remains as anhydrite, and from here up dip is largely dissolved away, leaving that cavernous brecciated horizon. So the waters rising up here bring with them that enrichment of sulfur. Down dip from here, where that anhydrite still exists, it is mined in the community of Shoals, and the mining of that gypsum is utilized. Gypsum that's mined from that is utilized for wall boarding or other products. So, one of the research questions here is just how much does this sulfur contribute to the corrosion of the carbonate rock at depth or even in more shallow settings? Because you not only can dissolve limestone and other carbonates using carbonic acid, which is the traditional means that we teach for forming caves, but also you can do that via sulfuric acid. And so the redox of that sulfate sulfide through the movement of that water down dip and then up through the fractures and out to the surface, that redox process can induce acidity into the water and be one mechanism by which we dissolve some of the carbonate rock. So here, obviously, the sulfates are highly enriched. Out on the Mitchell Plateau, they're largely absent. But in that in-between zone, like where Orangeville Rise and where Lost River Rise are, there is certainly a contribution of sulfate to the geochemistry of that water. And so to what extent does that control the dissolution of limestone?